There was a time when life felt slower and simpler. In this video, we revisit the small moments from childhood we didn't know we were losing. Quiet, everyday experiences that, over time, became the memories we still carry. Season 1. Playing outside until the streetlights came on. There was a time when the end of the day did not arrive through numbers on a screen or reminders that quietly demanded attention. It arrived in a way that felt almost natural, almost unnoticed, until we began to recognize its pattern. The light would begin to fade, not abruptly, but gradually, as if the day itself were gently stepping back. And then, one by one, the streetlights would turn on. Before that moment, the world outside was enough to hold our entire attention. We stepped out without needing a plan, without needing permission beyond a simple understanding that we would return. The streets were not just pathways between places. They were extensions of our lives. We ran, we walked, we paused, we gathered, and we moved again, all without a clear sense of time passing. There was no urgency in those hours. We did not think about how long we had been outside or how much time remained. The day felt open, as if it belonged to us, and we moved within it freely. The sound around us, voices, footsteps, distant movement, formed a quiet background that did not interrupt but accompanied. And then the shift would come. The glow of the streetlights was not a command, but it carried meaning. It signaled something we all understood without needing to speak. It told us that the day had reached its natural conclusion. We did not resist it. We simply turned slowly and made our way back. Season 2. The sound of bicycles on quiet streets. In those same streets, there was a rhythm that belonged entirely to everyday life. It was not loud, and it was not constant, but it was present enough to be felt, even when we did not consciously notice it. The sound of bicycles moving through quiet neighborhoods created a kind of continuity that connected one moment to the next. The steady rotation of wheels, the soft contact of the ground, the occasional metallic shift of chain, all of it blended into something familiar. It was not something we paused to listen to. It was simply there, part of the environment, as natural as the air we moved through. We rode without direction, often without destination. Movement itself was enough. There was a sense of balance in it, a quiet independence that did not need to be defined. Sometimes we rode alone, sometimes beside others, sometimes in loose groups that formed without intention and disappeared just as easily. The streets allowed for this kind of presence. They were not crowded or hurried. They held space for small movements, for repeated paths, for the simple act of going and returning without purpose. When a bicycle passed, it did not disrupt anything. It added to the atmosphere. The sound approached, existed for a moment, and then faded, leaving behind a quiet that felt unchanged, yet somehow fuller. Now, when we think back, that sound carries something more. It represents a kind of stillness within movement, a pace that did not rush forward, but allowed each moment to remain intact as it passed. Season 3. Homemade meals shared at the same time. Inside our homes, there was a structure that did not feel imposed, but lived. The day moved toward certain moments that required no announcement, no reminder, no adjustment. Mealtime was one of those moments. At a certain hour, everything seemed to align. The preparation had already been happening quietly in the background. Ingredients transformed over time, not quickly, but patiently. The result was not just food, but something that carried the effort of its making. We gathered without needing to be called more than once. There was an understanding that this moment mattered, even if we did not say so. The table became a place where the day paused, where movement slowed, and where presence became shared. There were conversations, of course, some light, some thoughtful, some incomplete. But even when words were few, the act of sitting together was enough. There was no pressure to fill the silence. It existed comfortably among us. Nothing competed for attention. There were no interruptions from outside the room, no constant signals pulling us elsewhere. What we had in front of us, food, people, time, was sufficient. And in that simplicity, something consistent was built, not something we noticed then, but something that shaped how we understood togetherness. a quiet repetition that, over time, became part of who we were. Season 4, cartoons at fixed hours on television. There was a time when watching something required patience, not because it was difficult, but because it followed a rhythm that we did not control. Cartoons appeared at certain hours, and those hours became part of the day's structure. We learned to wait. That waiting was not frustrating. It was simply how things worked. We knew when something would begin, and we adjusted ourselves to be there when it did. There was a sense of anticipation in that, a quiet preparation that made the moment feel more defined. When the television turned on, it was not background noise. It was an event, even if a small one. The sounds, the colors, the familiar sequences, all of it drew our attention fully, because there was nothing else competing for it. We watched with focus, not because we were instructed to, but because the experience allowed for it. It began, it unfolded, and then it ended. And when it ended, we did not look for more. The day continued. We returned to whatever came next, carry with us the feeling of something completed, not extended indefinitely. There was a natural boundary to it, a beginning and an end that we accepted without question. And in that structure, something subtle existed, a sense that not everything needed to be available all the time for it to matter. Season 5, knocking on a friend's door to play. Connection once required something very simple: presence. If we wanted to see someone, we did not send a message ahead of time. We did not confirm availability or wait for a response. We walked to their home, stood at the door, and knocked. Then we waited. There was uncertainty in that moment, but it did not feel uncomfortable. It was part of the process. We did not expect immediate access to others. We understood, without needing to articulate it, that people had their own rhythms. Sometimes the door opened quickly. Sometimes it took longer. Sometimes it did not open at all. And that was accepted. We did not interpret as rejection or inconvenience. It simply meant that the moment would happen another time, or not at all that day. There was no urgency in replacing it. When the door did open, there was no transition needed. We stepped into the moment naturally, as if we had always been part of it. There was no need to explain why we came or what we wanted to do. The act of being there was enough to begin. And in that simplicity, something important existed. A form of connection that did not rely on constant communication, but on a shared understanding that presence, when it happened, was real. Season 6, school notebooks filled by hand. There was a time when learning left visible traces. Not in files saved somewhere unseen, but in pages that accumulated slowly, carrying the weight of repetition, attention, and time. Notebooks were not just tools. They became quiet records of our daily effort. Each page began empty, waiting, and as we wrote line by line, something took shape. Not only the subject we were learning, but the way we engaged with it. Writing by hand required a certain pace. Thoughts could not move faster than the movement of our fingers. There was a natural limit, and within that limit, something deeper often settled. Mistakes were part of the page. They were crossed out, sometimes neatly, sometimes without care, but rarely erased entirely. They remained visible, woven into the structure of what followed. There was no expectation that everything should appear flawless. What mattered was continuity, the act of continuing despite imperfection. Over time, those notebooks grew thicker. The pages softened at the edges, corners folded, covers worn by use. They carried signs of presence, of something that had been handled repeatedly, not quickly, but consistently. Looking back, those pages feel different from anything we use now. They hold not just information, but the rhythm in which it was learned, the pauses, the effort, the gradual understanding that unfolded without needing to be immediate, and perhaps without realizing it. We were learning something beyond the content itself, how to stay with something long enough for it to take root. Season 7, the smell of rain on warm afternoons. Some moments cannot be fully described. They arrive quietly, without announcement, and yet they leave an impression that stays long after they have passed. The smell of rain on a warm afternoon is one of those moments. Before the rain began, there was often a subtle change in the air. The light shifted slightly, the wind softened, and everything seemed to pause, as if waiting. It was not dramatic. It was gentle, almost unnoticeable, unless we were paying close attention. And then the first drops, as they touched the ground, something rose, a scent that felt immediate and familiar, even if we had never tried to define it. It carried something earthy, something real, something connected to the place we were in. We did not need to understand it. We simply experienced it. There was no effort to capture it, no attempt to hold on to it beyond the moment itself. It came, it existed, and then it faded, leaving behind a memory that did not depend on words. Even now, when that same scent appears unexpectedly, it does not feel new. It feels like a return, a quiet reminder of something that once belonged to the ordinary rhythm of our days. It brings with it a stillness, a pause that feels both distant and familiar at the same time. Season 8, Family Photos Taken Sparingly. There was a time when photographs were not constant. They were moments chosen carefully, not because they were more important than others, but because they required intention. We did not take many pictures. Each one involved a small pause in the flow of the day. We gathered, adjusted our positions, waited for the right moment, not perfect, but sufficient. There was no immediate feedback. We did not see the result right away. There was a quiet trust that what had been captured would be enough. And because of that, each photograph carried a certain weight. It was not one among hundreds. It was one of a few, something that would be kept, revisited, and remembered not just for what it showed, but for the moment it represented. When we looked at those images later, they did not feel endless. They felt finite, contained, complete. They did not attempt to document everything. They simply preserved fragments. And perhaps that is why they remain so clear in memory, not because they were perfect, but because they were rare enough to matter without needing to prove it. Season 9, long, unhurried summer days. There were days that seemed to stretch beyond what time could measure. Summer carried a different kind of rhythm, one that did not push forward but allowed itself to unfold slowly. The light lingered longer. The evenings arrived later. And within that extended space, the day felt less defined, less structured. We did not feel the need to fill every moment. There was room for repetition, for stillness, for doing the same thing more than once without searching for something new. Hours passed, but not with urgency. They moved quietly, almost unnoticed, creating a sense that time itself was not something to be managed, but something to exist within. We moved through those days without looking ahead too far. There was no constant awareness of what came next. What was present was enough. And in that presence, something settled. A feeling that the day did not need to be optimized or completed. It simply needed to be lived, one moment at a time, without interruption. Looking back, those days feel longer than they were, not because they contained more, but because they were experienced more fully. Season 10, Bedtime Without Screens or Noise. As the day came to an end, it did not stop suddenly. It softened. The transition from activity to rest was gradual. The light dimmed, the sound of the house quieted, and movement slowed naturally, without needing to be enforced. Bedtime was not something separate from the day. It was its continuation, its final step. We did not carry the day with us in the form of constant stimulation. There were no competing sounds, no ongoing streams of information asking for attention. The world grew quieter, and we followed that quiet. Lying down did not feel like an interruption. It felt like a conclusion. There was space for thoughts to settle, for the mind to slow without resistance. The absence of noise was not emptiness. It was calm. And within that calm, rest arrived more easily, not because everything was simpler, but because the day had unfolded in a way that allowed it to end naturally. There was a rhythm to it, a beginning, a middle, and an end. And as sleep came, it did not feel like something we entered suddenly, but something we gently moved into, carried by the quiet that surrounded us. Now I'd love to hear from you. Where did you grow up, and what was it like back then? What do you remember most about those days? The streets, the routines, the small moments that stayed with you. Share your memories in the comments. Your story might bring those times back, even if just for a moment.